The crystal chandeliers of the Ritz-Carlton caught Grace Hamilton's diamond earrings as she strode through the marble lobby, her Armani heels clicking like a countdown to someone's termination. She didn't see the man until his scarred hand extended toward her. "Ms. Hamilton, I knew your mother." Grace recoiled as if he'd offered her poison. This man in his faded flannel shirt, worn jeans, and work boots didn't belong in her world. She pulled a tissue from her purse and deliberately wiped her hands, though they hadn't touched. "Security," she said coldly. "Keep these beggars away from paying guests." Nathan Cross stood motionless as two guards approached. His weathered face showed no anger, only a profound sadness that seemed decades old. "Some hands save lives, Ms. Hamilton," he said quietly, tucking his scarred fingers into his pockets. "Some just count money." As security escorted him out, Grace never noticed him drop a business card, one that would soon become her only salvation. Before we continue, please leave a like and let me know which city you're watching from. Now, let's get back to the story. Grace Hamilton hadn't always been cold. At 58, her silver hair, premature from decades of 18-hour days, framed a face that had forgotten how to smile without calculating return on investment. She'd built Hamilton Healthcare Corporation from her father's struggling clinic into a $500 million empire, but the price had been everything soft within her. Her corner office overlooked Boston's financial district, its walls decorated with magazine covers featuring her stern face, Ice Queen of Healthcare, the woman who never blinks. What those articles never mentioned was the 18-year-old girl who'd found her mother dying of lung cancer, her father too drunk to call an ambulance. That girl had made a promise at Maggie Hamilton's bedside: never be weak, never be vulnerable, never depend on anyone. For 40 years, she'd kept that promise. No husband, no children, just conference rooms and contracts. Her only indulgence was a 5-year affair with CFO Michael Barrett, a relationship she'd convinced herself was just another merger, bodies instead of businesses. Nathan Cross lived by different rules. At 52, he commanded a $3 billion technology empire from a modest colonial house, driving a 10-year-old pickup truck and wearing clothes from Goodwill. NC Holdings had saved 17 failing companies, but nobody connected the mysterious corporation to the scarred man who volunteered at Boston Children's Hospital. The burns covering 40% of his body told a story he rarely shared. A 12-year-old boy pulled from a Brooklyn tenement fire 40 years ago, saved by a young nurse who'd entered the inferno 3 times. That nurse's final rescue had cost her a lung, though she'd lived another 22 years before cancer claimed what the fire had damaged. Nathan's wealth meant nothing after his wife Rebecca died 5 years ago, leaving him to raise their son Luke alone. The boy had inherited his mother's gentle spirit and, cruelly, her cellular rebellion. Diagnosed with leukemia at 9. Luke Cross faced death with the wisdom of someone who understood that life's value couldn't be measured in dollars or days, but in moments of grace. The boy kept a journal titled, "People Who Smiled at Me Today," filling pages with small kindnesses from strangers. Despite needles and nausea, despite watching other children in the ward disappear in the night, Luke held on to a belief that would soon reshape 2 broken souls: everyone was worth saving, especially those who'd forgotten they needed saving at all. Grace Hamilton's morning had begun at 5:00 a.m., as it had every day for 30 years. Her penthouse alarm pulled her from dreams she never remembered into a reality she controlled absolutely. By 5:30, she was checking Asian markets on 3 screens, calculating how many millions she'd earned while sleeping. Her breakfast, black coffee and wheat toast. No butter was consumed while reviewing contracts for the Stellar Medical merger, a deal that would add another $100 million to Hamilton Healthcare's valuation. The meeting at the Ritz-Carlton was supposed to be a formality. 3 Japanese investors, 2 hours of negotiation, signatures by noon. She'd chosen the hotel's private dining room specifically for its intimidation factor, old money Boston, where million-dollar deals felt like pocket change against centuries of accumulated wealth. She'd noticed the man in the lobby immediately. Not because he stood out, the Ritz saw plenty of tourists, but because he seemed to be waiting. His flannel shirt was clean but faded, work boots worn but polished. When their eyes met, something flickered in his weathered face. recognition, hope. "Ms. Hamilton, I knew your mother." The words had stopped her mid-stride. Nobody mentioned Maggie Hamilton to her. Nobody who knew better. Anyway, this stranger with his scarred hands and patient eyes had crossed a line simply by speaking her mother's name. The tissue she'd used to wipe her hands, though they'd never touched his, was Hermes. $30 for a box of 50. The gesture was calculated, meant to humiliate. She'd perfected it over decades of dismissing the unworthy. Security. Keep these beggars away from paying guests. The words had come easily, automatically. She'd said variations of them thousands of times. Fire the incompetent. Deny the claim. Foreclose the mortgage. Business was binary profit or loss, strength or weakness, predator or prey. The man Nathan Cross, though she didn't know his name yet, had absorbed her cruelty like someone long accustomed to pain. His response about hands that save lives versus hands that count money might have stung if Grace still had feelings to hurt. Instead, she'd forgotten him before the elevator doors closed. The Japanese investors never showed. By noon, Grace was irritated. By 2:00 p.m., she was furious. By 3:00 p.m., when her assistant burst into her office with a face drained of color, she was about to become something else entirely desperate. "The FBI is here," Jennifer stammered. "They have warrants. They're seizing everything." The next 90 minutes dismantled 40 years of empire building. FBI agents carried out computers, boxes of files, hard drives containing decades of deals. The charges were federal embezzlement, insider trading, securities fraud. The evidence was overwhelming, documented in emails between her CFO Michael Barrett and a competitor, selling Hamilton Healthcare's secrets for $50 million. Michael, who'd shared her bed last night, who'd whispered about their future while his hands mapped territories he'd already sold, was gone. His office was empty except for a single note. "You taught me well. Take what you can. Give nothing back." The board convened by video within an hour. Their verdict was swift, immediate removal. Asset freeze. Criminal investigation pending. Stock price plummeted 90% in after-hours trading. By 4:30 p.m., Hamilton Healthcare Corporation was worthless paper, and Grace Hamilton was radioactive. She sat alone in her office, not her office anymore, as lawyers explained the scope of the catastrophe. 10,000 employees would lose their jobs by week's end. Pension funds evaporated. Patients in Hamilton facilities would be transferred or abandoned. Everything she'd built was collapsing, and she was powerless to stop it. "There might be one option," Jennifer said quietly. After the lawyers had gone, she held a business card between trembling fingers. "This was left in the lobby this morning, after the incident with that man." The card was simple. NC Holdings, Nathan Cross, President. Below it, a handwritten note. "Your mother saved my life. I can save your company." Jennifer's research took 20 minutes. NC Holdings 17 successful restructures, $3 billion in assets, reputation for impossible salvages. Nathan Cross, reclusive billionaire, never photographed, known for extreme privacy and unconventional methods. "The man from this morning," Grace said, her voice hollow. The one you had security remove," Jennifer finished. "Yes, he's your only hope." Grace's hands shook as she dialed. The phone rang once, twice, 3 times. Then his voice, calm and unsurprised. "This is Nathan. If you're calling because you need help, remember how you treated others when they needed yours." The voicemail beep seemed to echo forever. Grace, who'd given 10,000 presentations, who'd never stuttered in 40 years of negotiations, couldn't find words. She hung up, dialed again, got the same message. On the 3rd try, she finally spoke. "Mr. Cross, this is Grace Hamilton. I need to see you. Please. 10,000 jobs depend on it. I know I have no right to ask, but I'm asking anyway. I'm begging." The word felt like glass in her throat. Please give me a chance to apologize, to explain, to make this right. She left her direct number, her private email, her assistant's contact. Then she sat in the gathering darkness of her former office, watching the city lights below, waiting for a callback that might never come. The mighty Grace Hamilton, who'd refused to shake a man's hand that morning, would have kissed those same scarred fingers now if it would save her employees' futures. At 8:00 p.m., her phone buzzed with a text. Tomorrow, 9 a.m., 42 Elm Street, Brighton. Come alone. Dress appropriately. Grace stared at the message, then at her Armani suit, her Louboutin heels, her Cartier watch. Dress appropriately. For the first time in 40 years, she had no idea what that meant. She only knew that tomorrow she would face the man she'd humiliated and pray he was more merciful than she had ever been. The irony wasn't lost on her. This morning she'd wiped her hands clean of his imagined contamination. Tonight, she would gladly dirty them with whatever penance he demanded. Pride, she was learning, was a luxury only the secure could afford. And Grace Hamilton was no longer secure in anything except the certainty that she deserved whatever came next. Grace Hamilton had driven through Brighton 1,000 times without ever really seeing it. The working-class neighborhood northwest of Boston was just geography between destinations that mattered, filled with people she'd never need to know. Now, wearing the only casual clothes she owned, designer jeans and a cashmere sweater that still cost more than most made in a month, she parked her Mercedes outside 42 Elm Street and stared. The house was aggressively ordinary. Two-story colonial, white paint that needed touching up, a front porch with a wooden swing that had seen better decades. The lawn was mowed but not manicured, flowers growing wild rather than arranged. This couldn't be right. Nathan Cross was worth $3 billion. He should live in Beacon Hill, Brookline, anywhere but here. Yet the mailbox said, Cross, and the pickup truck in the driveway was the same one she'd seen him climb into yesterday after security had escorted him out. Grace checked her appearance in the mirror, makeup perfect, hair controlled, then realized how absurd that was. She was about to beg from a man she'd publicly humiliated. Her appearance was the least of her problems. The doorbell had been painted over so many times it stuck. She heard footsteps, slow and measured. And then Nathan Cross opened the door. He looked exactly as he had yesterday, flannel shirt, worn jeans, those scarred hands that had reached out to her and been rejected. But his eyes held no satisfaction at her reversal of fortune, no pleasure at her fall, just a quiet sadness, as if he'd been expecting this moment for years. Ms. Hamilton, please, come in. The interior was a shock of normalcy. Furniture from different decades, none of it matching. A coffee table made from an old door, bookshelves built from 2x4s and concrete blocks, overflowing with medical journals and children's books. The walls were covered with photographs, not the corporate trophy shots Grace displayed, but moments, birthday parties, Christmas mornings, first days of school. On the mantel above a brick fireplace, one photo stopped her cold. Her mother, young and smiling, in a nurse's uniform. Beside it, another photo, the same woman, decades older, holding a baby. Grace recognized that baby. It was herself. Days old, before her father's drinking had started, before everything had gone wrong. How do you have these? Nathan appeared from the kitchen, carrying 2 mugs. Not fine china or crystal, just ceramic cups with chips and cracks. One advertising a long-closed hardware store, the other hand-painted with "World's Best Dad" in a child's writing. Tea, he said simply. Please, sit. The couch sagged under her weight. Springs long past their prime. Grace had prepared a speech during the sleepless nights, strategic phrases about mutual benefit, market opportunities, synergistic potential. But sitting in this lived-in room, holding this chipped mug, surrounded by photos of a life actually lived rather than performed, the words crumbled. I'm sorry, she said instead, and then, to her horror, she started crying. Not the pretty tears of manipulative boardroom theater, but ugly, body-shaking sobs that 40 years of control couldn't contain. I'm so sorry. I don't even know what I'm apologizing for anymore. For yesterday. For everything. For becoming someone my mother wouldn't recognize. Nathan let her cry. He didn't comfort or condemn, just waited with the patience of someone who understood that some pain needed to be fully expressed before it could be addressed. When the sobs finally subsided, he handed her a box of tissues, generic brand, not the $30 Hermes she'd used to insult him. Brooklyn, January, 1985, he began, his voice carrying the weight of 4 decades. Tenement fire, started by a space heater, 20 families trapped. I was 12, lived on the 6th floor with my grandmother. She died trying to get me out. Smoke got her before we reached the stairs. His fingers traced the burn scars on his hands. Remembering. I made it to the 4th floor before I collapsed. Should have died there. But this young nurse, off shift, lived in the building. She'd already carried out 6 children. Fire department ordered her to stop. The structure was failing. She went in anyway. For me, a kid she'd never met. Nathan stood, walked to the mantel, picked up the photo of young Maggie Hamilton. 3rd-degree burns on her arms. Smoke inhalation that cost her a lung. She spent 2 months in the hospital recovering. I spent 6 months, mostly in ICU. She visited every day, read to me, told me stories about her baby daughter, Grace, who was going to change the world someday. Grace's breath caught. Her mother had never mentioned the fire, the boy, any of it. When I got out, I had nowhere to go. Foster system was overwhelmed. Your mother convinced the hospital to let me stay in a storage room they'd converted. Unofficial, probably illegal. She taught me to read better, helped with homework, made sure I ate. For 3 years, until I got into MIT on full scholarship, your mother was the only real parent I knew. He pulled out a yellowed envelope, handed it to Grace with reverent care. Her mother's handwriting, faded but unmistakable. Nathan, you'll do extraordinary things. I see it in you. But promise me when you're successful, when you've made your fortune, remember Grace. She's going to grow up hard because her father is weak and I won't be there long enough. She'll build walls. She'll mistake cruelty for strength. But underneath, she's still my little girl who cried when butterflies died. If you can, help her remember who she was before the world taught her to be afraid. Love, Maggie. Grace read it 3 times before the words really penetrated. She knew she was dying. Lung cancer, from the fire damage. She knew for years before it got bad. Never told anyone, especially not you. Nathan sat back down, his weathered face gentle. I kept track of you both. Tried to help without you knowing. Anonymous donations to your father's clinic. Strategic investments that helped you grow. When your mother was dying, I paid for her hospice care through a shell company. She never knew. Why didn't you tell me? Why didn't she tell me? Your mother believed suffering in silence was noble. You believed the same thing, just expressed it differently. She absorbed pain. You inflicted it. Both of you trying to control what couldn't be controlled. The truth of it hit Grace like physical blow. She saw herself clearly for the first time, not a powerful CEO, but a frightened child, building empires on sand to avoid feeling powerless again. Your company can be saved, Nathan said quietly. I have the resources, the connections. Michael Barrett was sloppy. The FBI case will collapse once my lawyers get involved. Stock price will recover. Employees' jobs secured. What do you want? Grace asked, though she knew there would be a price. There always was. 30 days. You work at Boston Children's Hospital, where my son is a patient. Not as Grace Hamilton, CEO, as Grace, janitor, minimum wage. Live on what you earn. No outside resources. You'll clean rooms, empty bedpans, mop floors. You'll see how the other 99% live, how your mother lived. 30 days. It seemed both endless and insignificant. Your mother spent 30 years serving others. I'm only asking for 30 days. You'll report to Walter, he's the head of maintenance. A good man. Nobody else will know who you are. You violate the terms, reveal your identity, or quit. and your company dies. 10,000 jobs, gone. Grace thought of her penthouse, her designer clothes, her manicured hands that had never held a mop. Then she thought of Jennifer's face when she'd said 10,000 people would lose their jobs. Families destroyed, mortgages foreclosed, children's college funds evaporated. Why? She asked. Why help me at all after how I treated you? Nathan smiled. The first real smile she'd seen from him. Because your mother saved me when I didn't deserve it. Because my son, Luke, despite fighting leukemia for 3 years, still believes people are basically good. Because I want to believe that the little girl who cried over butterflies is still in there somewhere, under all that armor. When do I start? Tomorrow, 6 a.m. Wear something you don't mind ruining. You'll be issued uniforms, but the first day is always rough. Live wherever you can afford on minimum wage. No credit cards, no savings, no help, just you and $7.25 an hour. Grace did quick math. After taxes, maybe $900 for the month. Her monthly parking spot costs more than that. I'll do it. Nathan stood, extended his hand, the same scarred hand she'd refused to shake 24 hours ago. This time, Grace took it, held it, felt the ridged texture of old burns, the calluses of real work. It was the strongest hand she'd ever touched. One more thing, Nathan said as he walked her to the door. My son doesn't know who you are. To him, you'll just be Grace, the cleaning lady. He's 12, dying, and still finds reasons to smile every day. Try not to disappoint him. As Grace walked to her Mercedes, which she'd have to sell or store by tomorrow, she looked back at the ordinary house with its extraordinary occupant. Through the window, she saw Nathan pick up the photo of her mother, touch it gently, then place it back on the mantel next to pictures of a boy who must be Luke. 3 generations connected by sacrifice, loss, and now, perhaps, redemption. Tomorrow she would begin the hardest month of her life. But for the first time in 40 years, Grace Hamilton suspected it might also be the most important. Grace Hamilton arrived at Boston Children's Hospital at 5:47 a.m., 13 minutes early despite stopping 3 times to vomit from anxiety. She'd spent the night in a Motel 6 after selling her Mercedes to a dealer who'd barely hidden his glee at her desperation. The room cost $59, leaving her with $841 for the rest of the month. She'd slept on sheets that felt like sandpaper, listening to arguments through thin walls, wondering how her mother had done this for 30 years. The employee entrance was in the basement, fluorescent lights flickering over concrete walls. Grace wore jeans from Target $17 and a t-shirt from Goodwill that smelled like someone else's life despite 3 washes. Her hands, which had signed billion-dollar deals hours ago, now trembled as she pushed open the door marked Environmental Services. Walter was waiting, all 73 years of him, wearing a uniform that had seen better decades but was spotlessly clean. His face was a roadmap of wrinkles, each line earned, his eyes holding the particular kindness that came from surviving things that should have killed you. Your Grace, he said, not a question. Mr. Cross said you'd be coming. Haven't had a new person in 6 months. Most don't last a week. He handed her a uniform polyester in industrial green, her name embroidered crooked on the pocket. The changing room was a converted closet that smelled of industrial disinfectant and despair. Grace emerged feeling like she was wearing a costume, playing at being poor, but Walter's approving nod was genuine. First rule, he said, leading her to a supply closet bigger than her new motel room. Dignity isn't in the job, it's in doing it well. These children are fighting for their lives. We keep their world clean, safe. It matters. The morning was education and humiliation. Bedpans came first, Walter showing her how to empty, clean, sanitize without gagging. Grace threw up twice, blamed it on breakfast she hadn't eaten. Her manicured nails broke within an hour. $1,000 gel polish chipping as she scrubbed. By noon, her back screamed from mopping. Muscles she'd never known existed announcing themselves in protest. In the cafeteria, she stood with her tray subsidized lunch, $3 looking for somewhere to sit. The other maintenance staff had taken a table together, but when Grace approached, conversation stopped. They'd seen her type before someone playing at poverty, probably for a book or documentary, who'd disappear once the experiment ended. She ate alone, peanut butter sandwich and apple, listening to nurses discuss patients she'd never have noticed before. That's when she saw Luke for the first time since arriving. He was in a wheelchair, IV pole attached, being pushed by Nathan toward the treatment rooms. The boy was thin in the way that suggested he'd once been sturdy, his head bald from chemo but held high. When he passed Grace's table, he smiled, not the polite acknowledgement of social convention, but genuine warmth, as if her existence brought him joy. "Hi," he said simply. "I'm Luke. You're new." "Grace," she managed. "Yes." "First day." He reached into his pocket, pulled out an apple, the good kind, not the mealy ones from the subsidized lunch, and placed it on her table. "For later. First days are hard." Grace's instinct kicked in before she could stop it. "I don't take charity." Luke's smile didn't falter, but something shifted in his eyes, not hurt, but understanding. "Neither do I. That's why I know when someone needs a gift instead." Nathan watched the exchange silently, his expression unreadable. As he wheeled Luke away, the boy called back, "See you tomorrow, Ms. Grace." The afternoon was worse than the morning. A toddler with stomach flu had explosive diarrhea just as Grace was cleaning her room. The smell made her retch, but the little girl was crying, apologizing in that heartbreaking way children do when they think being sick is their fault. Grace found herself holding the child while her mother ran for nurses, whispering, "It's okay, sweetheart. It's not your fault." The same words her own mother had said during her father's drunken rages. By 6 p.m., Grace could barely stand. Her feet were swollen in the cheap shoes, her hands raw from chemicals despite gloves. Her hair escaped from its ponytail into strings of defeat. She understood now why her mother had come home too tired to fight, too exhausted to leave, too broken to be anything but kind. The second day was harder. Her body had stiffened overnight into shapes of pain she hadn't imagined possible. The motel shower ran lukewarm for 3 minutes before turning cold. She arrived to find Walter had left her the worst assignments, the ICU rooms, where death lingered like fog and every surface required special protocols. But in room 341 she found Luke again, reading to a younger boy who was unconscious, machines breathing for him. Luke looked up when she entered with her cart. "This is Tommy," he explained. "He's been asleep for 2 weeks, but I think he hears me. I'm reading him Harry Potter." "We're at the good part." Grace worked silently while Luke read, his voice changing for different characters, adding sound effects for spells. When she finished, Luke stopped her. "You're crying." Grace touched her face, surprised by the wetness. "No. It's the cleaning chemicals." "It's okay to cry here," Luke said gently. "Everyone does. Even the doctors. Especially the doctors." The rest of the week blurred into routine. Wake at 5 Huzro. Motel 6 coffee that tasted like burnt rubber. Drive the 10-year-old Honda she'd bought for $900, praying it would start. Clock in. Clean. Vomit occasionally. Clean more. Watch children fight battles that made corporate takeovers look like playground games. Clock out. Drive home. Shower. Collapse. On Friday, she sat in the supply closet eating her peanut butter sandwich when someone knocked. Sarah Chen stood in the doorway, not Dr. Chen here, but Sarah, a friend. "You're the new one Walter's been praising." "He praises me." Grace couldn't hide her surprise. "Says you haven't quit yet." "That's praise from Walter." Sarah sat on an overturned bucket. "Luke asked me to give you this." It was a journal, cheap spiral notebook from the hospital gift shop. On the cover, Luke had written, "Sad lady who forgot how to smile day one of remembering." He keeps journals on everyone, Sarah explained. Says people need to be documented so they know they matter. Grace opened it to find Luke's careful handwriting. Day 1, Ms. Grace said she doesn't take charity. I think someone hurt her once by giving her something and taking it back. She cleans like she's angry at dirt personally. But she was gentle with Lily when she got sick. Contradiction means complexity. Complex people are worth knowing. Grace's second week began with a revelation. Ruth, the head nurse on the pediatric ward, was 68 years old and had worked at the hospital for 45 years. She cornered Grace during a morning break, her eyes sharp with recognition. "I knew it would be you eventually," Ruth said simply. "I don't understand." "You're Maggie Hamilton's daughter. You look exactly like her, except for the hardness. She had your face but soft eyes. You have her eyes, but they've gone hard." Grace wanted to deny it, maintain her cover, but Ruth waved off her protests. "Relax. Walter figured it out too. We're not going to tell. We knew your mother, loved her. We want to see if her daughter is in there somewhere. You knew my mother, knew her child. I trained her, back when nurses were allowed to be nurses, not paperwork machines. Your mother was the best I ever saw. Not the most skilled. Others were faster with IVs or better at medications. But Maggie, she had the gift." "What gift?" "She saw people, really saw them. Not their disease, not their charts, not their insurance status. She saw their fear, their hope, their need to matter. She'd hold dying children like they were her own, stay unpaid overtime to comfort families, used her grocery money to buy toys for kids whose parents couldn't afford them." Ruth pulled out a photo album from her locker, pages yellow with age. There was Maggie, young and vibrant, surrounded by children in hospital beds, all of them laughing despite IVs and bandages. This was Christmas, 1994. Your mother organized a party for the kids who couldn't go home, convinced doctors to dress as elves. She was Santa. Spent 3 months' salary on presents. Page after page showed Maggie Hamilton living a life Grace had never known existed. Her mother at birthday parties for children who wouldn't see another one. Her mother sleeping in a chair beside a teenager whose parents had abandoned him. Her mother teaching other nurses, not procedures but compassion. "Why didn't she tell me?" Grace asked, her voice breaking. "Because she saw how your father's weakness hurt you. She thought if you were strong enough, cold enough, you'd never be vulnerable like her. She was wrong. Of course, vulnerability isn't weakness. It's the only real strength there is." That afternoon, Grace found herself assigned to Luke's room for deep cleaning. Nathan was at work, even billionaires had to maintain appearances, and Luke was alone, sketching in a notebook. "What are you drawing?" Grace asked. "Angels," Luke said, showing her. 3 figures with wings, all connected by lines of light. My mom, Ms. Maggie, and someone else I haven't met yet. Ms. Maggie. Dad's friend who died. He talks about her sometimes. Says she saved him in a fire. I think she's why he started visiting sick kids, even before I got sick." Grace's throat closed. This child was drawing her mother without knowing it, seeing connections Grace had been blind to for 40 years. "Can I tell you a secret?" Luke asked suddenly. Grace nodded, not trusting her voice. "I know I'm dying. The treatments aren't working. Dad doesn't know I know. He still believes in miracles, but I've made peace with it. I just want to do something that matters first." "What do you want to do?" "Help Dad remember how to be happy. He's been sad since Mom died, and I'm making it worse by being sick. If I can help him find someone to love him after I'm gone, then dying won't be so bad." Grace had to leave the room. She stood in the hallway, sobbing into industrial paper towels, as nurses pretended not to notice. This 12-year-old child was trying to save his father while dying, showing more courage in a single moment than Grace had shown in 58 years. The third week brought Grace face to face with her past in ways she couldn't have imagined. Walter had assigned her to the archives, organizing old medical records for digitization. In a box marked 1985-1986, she found her mother's employment file. The official records were standard hire date, position, salary. But behind them were incident reports, and Grace's hands shook as she read them. January 15, 1985. Nurse Hamilton entered burning building against direct orders. Suffered severe burns and smoke inhalation while rescuing minor Nathan Williams later, Cross, after adoption, recommended for termination due to reckless endangerment. But instead of termination, there was a commendation signed by the hospital board, and then page after page of letters from families Maggie had helped. She stayed with our son for 14 hours straight. She paid for our daughter's medicine when insurance denied us. She taught us how to care for our disabled child at home. Behind the letters was a financial record Grace didn't understand at first. Monthly payments from 1986 to 2005 marked Personal Loan Repayment M. Hamilton. The amounts matched what her mother should have earned but never brought home. Grace had always assumed her father drank the money away. Walter found her there, surrounded by papers, crying again. He sat beside her on the concrete floor, his old bones protesting. Your mother took out a second mortgage to pay for that boy's medical bills. The one from the fire. Hospital was going to transfer him to state care, basically a death sentence with those burns. She paid for everything. Worked double shifts to cover it. Nathan Cross. That's right. Though he paid her back. Every penny. Once he made his fortune, she never cashed the checks. We found them in her locker after she died, endorsed to the children's ward. That's how we got the new ICU equipment. Grace thought about all the times she'd accused her mother of weakness, of enabling her father, of not fighting back. All the while, Maggie Hamilton had been fighting a different battle entirely, saving lives with money she didn't have, time she couldn't spare, love that seemed infinite despite the drain. There's more, Walter said quietly. He pulled out another folder, this one marked with Grace's name. Inside were receipts for her college tuition, not from her father's clinic profits as she'd believed, but from her mother's third job, cleaning offices at night. There were photos too, Grace at graduation, Harvard MBA, first day as CEO, all taken from a distance, as if Maggie had been there but hidden, watching her daughter achieve everything while standing in shadows. The last item was a letter, sealed, addressed to Grace in her mother's handwriting. The date was 1 week before Maggie's death. My dearest Grace, if you're reading this, it means I've failed. I wanted to protect you from the world's cruelty by teaching you to be strong. Instead, I taught you to be hard. Strength and hardness aren't the same thing. Strength can bend without breaking. Hardness shatters. I pray someday you'll learn the difference. All my love. Mom. That evening, Grace found Luke in the chapel, not praying but sitting quietly, watching candles flicker. She sat beside him, both of them silent for a long moment. Do you believe in God? Luke asked. I don't know anymore. I do. Not the angry God some people talk about, but the one who sends angels, like my mom, like Ms. Maggie, like you. I'm no angel, Luke. Not yet. But you're becoming one. I can see it happening. 3 days later, Grace discovered the cruelest irony of all. She was filing insurance claims when she recognized a case number. 3 years ago, Hamilton Healthcare had denied funding for an experimental treatment. She remembered the board meeting, how they'd laughed at the sob story of a 9-year-old with leukemia whose father was willing to sell everything. The 9-year-old had been Luke Cross. She'd signed his death warrant with the same hand that now cleaned his room. The 4th week marked Grace's transformation, though it began with her considering running away. The weight of denying Luke's treatment crushed her. She'd spent the weekend in her motel room, not eating, not sleeping, just staring at the water-stained ceiling and seeing that boardroom where she'd laughed at a dying child's last hope. But Monday came, and habit got her to the hospital. Luke was worse, anyone could see it. The experimental treatment he'd finally received was failing. His skin had gone translucent, his eyes sunken, but his smile remained untouched by disease. "Ms. Grace," he called out when she entered, "I wrote you another journal entry. Want to hear it?" She nodded, unable to speak. Day 21. Ms. Grace looks at me like I'm breaking her heart. I think someone she loved was sick once and she couldn't help them. She's learning that cleaning isn't about dirt, it's about making space for healing. Even if the body can't heal, the soul can. She's proof. That afternoon, Grace did something she'd never done in 58 years of life. She asked for help, using a payphone to maintain her cover. She called contacts in Switzerland, Germany, Japan. The experimental treatment Luke needed had evolved. There was a new version, not FDA approved, available only in Barcelona. Cost $2 million. Grace had one offshore account Michael Barrett hadn't found, hidden under her mother's maiden name. It held exactly $2.3 million, her emergency fund, the one thing she'd kept for the catastrophe she'd always expected. She emptied it with a single phone call. The treatment would arrive Thursday. She had the hospital administer it under a fake clinical trial, paperwork forged with skills learned from decades of corporate manipulation. Luke's improvement was almost immediate, color returning, energy increasing, the cancer retreating like shadows from light. But she kept working. Her hands, once soft, had grown calloused. Her back, once rigid with pride, had learned to bend. She ate lunch with Walter and the maintenance crew, learning their names, their stories, their quiet heroism. James, who worked nights to pay for his daughter's education. Maria, who'd fled violence in Guatemala and sent half her paycheck home. Derek, whose son had died in this very hospital, but who stayed because someone needs to make it easier for other parents. She found herself genuinely caring about her work. Not the abstract caring of efficiency, but the physical caring of making sure Tommy's unconscious form was turned to prevent bed sores, that Lily's room smelled like lavender because it reminded her of home, that the ICU was spotless because infections killed more surely than cancer. Nathan noticed the change. He'd stop by during her shifts, watching her work, saying nothing but nodding occasionally. On day 28, he finally spoke. "Luke's getting better." "Children are resilient," Grace replied, continuing to mop. "It's more than that. The treatment he's getting, it's not the one insurance approved." Grace said nothing, wringing her mop with hands that no longer shook from the work. "Thank you," Nathan said quietly. "Don't thank me. I'm the reason he needed it in the first place." The words hung between them, Grace's confession landing like a physical blow. Nathan's face went through stages: confusion, realization, anger, and finally, something like understanding. "You're the one who denied the funding 3 years ago." "Yes. You could have said nothing. My mother lived her entire life saying nothing about her sacrifices. Look where it got us. Truth might hurt, but silence hurts worse." Nathan left without another word. Grace thought she'd lost everything, but she kept working. 2 more days. She'd finish what she'd started, even if Nathan destroyed her company tomorrow. But that evening, Luke found her. He was walking now, still weak but determined. He sat beside her in the supply closet where she was eating dinner, rice and beans, all she could afford after the secret medical payment. "Dad told me what you did. Both things, the denial and the payment." Grace couldn't look at him. "I'm sorry doesn't begin to cover it. I know. That's why I forgive you anyway." The simple grace of it, a child forgiving the woman who'd tried to kill him with paperwork, shattered something inside Grace. She sobbed. And Luke held her, this dying boy comforting the woman who'd signed his death warrant. "Want to know a secret?" Luke whispered. "I knew who you were from day one. Dad had newspaper clippings. I recognized you. Why didn't you say anything? Because you needed to not be Grace Hamilton for a while. You needed to just be Grace, and I think you found her. Day 25 began like any other in Grace's new life. She arrived at 5:45 a.m., changed into her uniform that now felt like second skin, and began her rounds. The pediatric ICU was quiet, that dangerous quiet that nurses feared because it meant the universe was gathering itself for something terrible. Grace had learned to read these silences, the way her mother must have, as warnings written in the absence of sound. At 10:47 a.m., the universe struck. Grace was mopping the hallway when she heard the alarm, not the routine beeps of standard monitoring, but the sharp, insistent shriek that meant a child was dying. She knew before she saw the room number that it was Luke. Nathan was already there when she arrived, his billion-dollar composure shattered entirely. Luke's small body was seizing, his monitors showing numbers that Grace had learned meant nothing good: oxygen saturation dropping, heart rate erratic, blood pressure unstable. Dr. Sarah Chen worked with controlled desperation, calling out medications, adjusting drips, her hands steady even as her voice carried the edge of panic that meant she was losing this battle. "Infection," she said to Nathan, though her eyes included Grace in the explanation. "His immune system is too compromised. The treatment was working, but it left him defenseless against something else." Nathan's legs gave out. He would have hit the floor if Grace hadn't caught him, her arms strong now from weeks of real work holding him upright. For a moment, their positions reversed: the billionaire supported by the janitor, the powerful helpless, the roles that had defined them meaningless in the face of a child's failing body. "Luke," Nathan whispered, reaching for his son's hand. "Please, buddy, please." The seizure stopped, but Luke didn't wake. Sarah continued working, adding antibiotics, adjusting ventilator settings, doing everything medical science allowed. But Grace had seen enough children die in these 4 weeks to recognize the look on Sarah's face, the expression of a doctor who was running out of miracles. "He's asking for someone," a nurse said suddenly. Luke's eyes had opened, unfocused but seeking. His lips moved. No sound at first, then barely audible. "Ms. Grace." Nathan looked at her, and in his eyes was every apology for every judgment he'd ever considered. "Please," he said simply. Grace moved to Luke's bedside, took his small hand in her calloused ones. His fingers were so cold, as if death was already claiming him from the extremities inward. "I'm here, Luke. I'm right here." His eyes found hers, focused with effort that must have cost him everything. "Scared," he whispered. "I know, sweetheart. I'm scared too." "Not of dying," Luke managed. "Scared Dad will forget how to smile." Grace looked at Nathan, saw him fracture at his son's words. This child, 12 years old and dying, was worried about the living, not himself. It was a courage that made every boardroom victory Grace had ever achieved look like cowardice. "He won't forget," Grace promised. "I won't let him." Luke's grip tightened slightly. "Promise?" "I promise." "Good. You keep promises, even the ones that hurt." The medical team continued their fight, but Luke's attention had shifted somewhere beyond the room. He was looking at something none of them could see, his face suddenly peaceful. "She's here," he said, and for a moment Grace thought he meant her, but his eyes were focused on empty air beside Nathan. "Mom says it's okay. She says—" He paused, listening to something only he could hear. "She says angels don't always have wings. Sometimes they have mops." Despite everything, Nathan laughed, a broken sound, but real. Luke smiled at the sound, then his attention returned to Grace. "Will you stay as long as you need me?" "Forever. Then, Dad needs forever." The monitors began their alarming again, but Luke seemed beyond their reach, existing in some space between life and death where pain couldn't follow. Grace held his hand while Nathan held the other, two people who'd been strangers a month ago now bound by a child's failing heartbeat. Sarah worked for another hour before admitting what everyone knew: they were buying time, not saving a life. The infection had spread to Luke's bloodstream, sepsis setting in with the ruthless efficiency of biology's cruelest mathematics. Organs were beginning to shut down, a cascade failure that medicine could slow but not stop. It was then, in the midst of medical crisis and parental despair, that Grace's phone rang. She would have ignored it. But the caller ID showed the FBI. She stepped into the hallway, answered with a voice rough from unshed tears. "Ms. Hamilton, this is Agent Foster. Michael Barrett was arrested this morning in the Caymans. He's been cooperative, very cooperative. He's revealed some interesting information about your financial history. This isn't a good time. He says you've been secretly donating millions for years. Orphanages, medical bills for strangers, entire hospital wings funded anonymously. He has documentation going back 20 years. Says you hid it all, even from the board." Grace closed her eyes. Her secret, the one thing she'd hidden deeper than offshore accounts exposed by the man who'd betrayed her. He's trying to establish that you weren't part of the embezzlement, that you're actually what he calls pathologically generous in private. His words, not mine. The Bureau needs to verify these donations for the case. Can you confirm? "Yes," Grace said quietly. "It's true. The anonymous donor who paid for the Children's Hospital's new cardiac unit, that was you." "Yes." "The fund that covers treatment for uninsured children at 17 hospitals." "Yes." "The scholarship program that sent 300 kids from poverty to medical school." "Yes." There was silence on the other end. Then, "Ms. Hamilton, this changes everything. Barrett's testimony, combined with this evidence, clears you entirely. You're a victim, not a perpetrator. Your company can be salvaged immediately. The board wants to reinstate you." Grace looked through the window at Luke dying, at Nathan breaking, at the child who'd forgiven her unforgivable sin. "I'll call you back," she said, and hung up. When she returned to the room, Nathan was holding Luke. Tubes and wires be damned, rocking him like the infant he'd once been. Luke's breathing was labored, mechanical ventilation abandoned for human comfort. Sarah had stopped the aggressive measures, accepting what Luke had apparently accepted days ago. "Tell him," Nathan said to Grace, his voice destroyed. "Tell him about the donations. Tell him who you really are." So Grace did. She sat beside them and told Luke everything: the donations she'd hidden, the families she'd helped, the children she'd saved even while denying others. She told him about her mother's secret sacrifices, about the money that went to healing instead of luxury. She told him she'd been two people her entire life: the public Grace who counted money and the private Grace who gave it away, never able to reconcile the two until a 12-year-old boy showed her how. "I knew," Luke whispered, and somehow he was smiling. "I found the records. Dad keeps everything. I knew who you really were." "Then why?" Grace asked. "Why forgive me? Because Mom taught me something before she died. She said hurt people, but healed people heal people. You were hurt. Now you're healing. That means you can heal others." Nathan was crying openly now, his son's wisdom devastating in its simplicity. Grace found herself praying for the first time since her mother's death, not for a miracle, but for the strength to be what this child believed she could be. "I need you both to promise something," Luke said, his voice fading but determined. "Promise you'll take care of each other." "Luke," Nathan began, but his son interrupted. "Promise, please. Mom's gone. I'm going. You two are broken in ways that fit together. Promise you'll try." It was an impossible request from a dying child asking his father and the woman who'd signed his death warrant to find solace in each other. But Grace and Nathan, looking at each other over Luke's failing body, nodded. "We promise," they said together. Luke smiled, satisfied. Then he looked at something beyond them again, his face lighting up with joy that transcended his suffering. "She's beautiful," he said. "Mom, You're so beautiful. And Ms. Maggie, you're here too. Grace's breath caught. Luke was seeing her mother. Hallucination or heaven. She didn't know and didn't care. The child was finding comfort in visions of the dead who'd loved the living. They say it's time, Luke announced, his voice stronger than it had been in hours. They say thank you. Both of you. Thank you for letting me teach you what they couldn't. Nathan pulled Luke closer, Grace's hand still in the child's grip. We love you, buddy. We love you so much. I know. That's why this is okay. Love doesn't end when breathing stops. Those were Luke's last coherent words. He lingered for another 3 hours, his breathing becoming shallower, his heartbeat slower, but his face remained peaceful. Other families had gathered in the hallway, word spreading through the ward that Luke Cross was leaving them. Through the window, Grace could see children in wheelchairs, parents holding infants, staff who'd grown to love this boy who'd treated dying like just another adventure. Someone started singing a hymn Grace recognized from her mother's funeral. Other voices joined, soft and broken, but unified. The entire pediatric ward was singing Luke Cross into whatever came next. And Grace found herself singing too, remembering words she thought she'd forgotten. At 8:17 p.m., with his father holding him and Grace still clutching his hand, Luke Cross took his final breath. The monitors flatlined, their electronic shrieking almost blasphemous in the sacred silence that followed. Sarah reached to turn them off, her own face wet with tears. Time of death, 8:17 p.m., she said formally, then broke protocol entirely. Cause of death completed his purpose. Nathan was beyond words, beyond tears, existing in that space where grief is too large for expression. Grace held him as he held Luke, 3 bodies in a trinity of loss. She whispered the only truth she knew. He saved us both. This 12-year-old boy saved us both. The room filled with people, nurses, doctors, janitors, other parents. They came to pay respects, to touch Nathan's shoulder, to cry for a child who'd made dying look like living. Walter was there, and Ruth, and families whose children Luke had comforted, read to, made laugh despite the machines and medicines. Someone had brought Luke's journal, the one where he'd documented people who'd smiled. They began reading entries aloud. Day 3, Marcus smiled when I gave him my jello. Day 45, Nurse Ruth smiled when I told her she looked like an angel with tired wings. Day 98, Dad smiled when I beat him at chess. I think he let me win. But that's okay. Day 150, Ms. Grace smiled today. Really smiled. Not the sad one she usually does. She's remembering who she was before the world taught her to be afraid. That last entry broke everyone completely. Grace Hamilton, who'd built an empire on emotional distance, who'd refused to shake hands that morning a month ago, was on her knees beside a dead child, weeping for every life she'd touched and failed to touch, every hand she'd refused to hold, every moment she'd chosen pride over compassion. But in that grief was something else, a strange peace. Luke was right. Love didn't end when breathing stopped. It continued in the promises made, the lessons learned, the changes wrought in souls too stubborn to change any other way. The morning after Luke died, Boston woke to an unexpected April snow, not a blizzard. Just gentle flakes that made the world quiet and clean, as if nature itself was offering a benediction. Grace hadn't slept. She'd stayed with Nathan through the night as he held Luke's body until the funeral home finally convinced him to let go. Now she stood in the hospital's family room, making calls with a composure that was purely mechanical, her CEO skills operating on autopilot while her heart lay shattered. Nathan sat in the corner, staring at nothing. He hadn't spoken since Luke's final breath, hadn't cried, hadn't moved except when physically guided. The billion-dollar genius who'd saved 17 companies couldn't save himself from the mathematics of grief. 1 child minus 1 life equals infinite emptiness. The service will be Thursday, Grace told him gently. Riverside Chapel. Luke loved their stained glass windows. Remember, he said they looked like rainbow promises. Nathan didn't respond, but his fingers moved slightly, tracing patterns in the air sign language. Grace realized Luke had been teaching himself ASL to communicate with a deaf child in the ward. Even preparing for death, he'd been learning to speak to others. Grace's phone rang constantly. The FBI, the board, reporters who'd somehow learned about Michael Barrett's arrest and her vindication. She ignored them all except one Jennifer, her former assistant. Ms. Hamilton, the board is meeting. They want to reinstate you immediately. The stock is recovering. Everyone wants you back. Not now, Jennifer. But the company. A 12-year-old boy is dead. Nothing else matters today. She hung up and returned to the impossible task of planning a funeral for a child who'd lived more in 12 years than most do in 80. The hospital staff had taken over, she discovered. Ruth was coordinating food, dozens of families insisting on contributing dishes Luke had loved. Walter was arranging transportation for families who couldn't afford to come. Sarah Chen was creating a memory book, collecting stories from every child Luke had touched. 317, she told Grace. That's how many children Luke interacted with during his treatments here. Every single family wants to attend. The funeral home director, a man who'd buried too many children, took one look at the growing list and moved the service to the cathedral. No charge, he said when Grace pulled out her credit card. Luke read to my grandson during chemo. This is the least I can do. And by Wednesday, it became clear this wasn't going to be a normal funeral. The mayor's office called Luke had won a citizenship award 3 years ago for reading to elderly residents in nursing homes. The fire department wanted to provide an honor guard. Luke had raised money for burned children despite his father's trauma. The Boston Symphony offered musicians. Luke had loved classical music, said it sounded like mathematics dancing. Grace found herself in the surreal position of being Grace Hamilton, former CEO, planning a funeral as Grace the janitor, wearing her minimum wage clothes while coordinating with people who'd once sought her donations. None of them recognized her, and she didn't correct them. Nathan finally spoke Wednesday evening, as they sat in Luke's hospital room, still exactly as he'd left it, as if he might return. He knew, Nathan said, his voice rusty from disuse. He knew he was dying. He knew you were Grace Hamilton. He knew everything, and he forgave it all. He was 12, Grace said. 12-year-olds shouldn't have to forgive anything. But he did, and we promised him. We promised him. They sat in silence, two broken adults held together by a child's last wish. Thursday morning dawned clear and cold. Grace arrived at the cathedral to find it already filling, not just with expected mourners, but with unexpected ones. The janitor from a rival hospital who Luke had befriended during a transfer. The homeless man Luke had given his lunch to every Friday. Teachers from the school he'd attended before getting too sick. Grace stood at the entrance, greeting people as they arrived, a reversal of every corporate event she'd hosted where others had greeted her. She wore the only black dress she now owned, bought from Goodwill for $15, and somehow it felt more appropriate than any designer outfit she'd ever worn. Nathan arrived in the car Luke had loved, not the Mercedes or Tesla that sat in his garage, but the old pickup truck they'd restored together during Luke's brief remission. He looked lost, a father without a son, a man without purpose. The service began at 11. The cathedral was beyond capacity. People standing in aisles, in the vestibule, on the steps outside, listening through open doors. The small casket at the front seemed impossible. How could something so small contain someone who'd touched so many? The priest spoke first, but briefly. Luke asked me once if God got tired of taking children. I told him God doesn't take children. He receives them when their work is done. Luke's work, it seems, touched more lives than most of us will in a lifetime. Then came the stories. Marcus, 8 years old with leukemia, stood on a box to reach the microphone. Luke taught me that being sick isn't who you are. It's just something that's happening to you. An elderly woman, Dorothy, spoke next. This young man visited me every week in the nursing home, reading stories, playing cards. He said old people and sick kids understood each other because both knew time was precious. Teacher after teacher, nurse after nurse, family after family. Each story revealed another facet of Luke Cross, the boy who gave away his birthday presents to kids who wouldn't live to see their own birthdays, who wrote letters to children too sick to have visitors, who learned magic tricks to distract toddlers during procedures. Then it was Grace's turn. She stood at the podium, looking out at hundreds of faces, and made a decision that would have horrified her a month ago. "My name is Grace Hamilton," she began, and watched recognition ripple through the crowd. Yes, that Grace Hamilton, former CEO of Hamilton Healthcare, the woman who 3 years ago denied funding for Luke's treatment. Gasps, murmurs, anger flickering across faces. Luke knew who I was from the first day I started cleaning his room. He knew I was the reason he almost died at 9. And he forgave me before I even asked. He told me that hurt people, but healed people heal people. She told them everything: her mother's sacrifices, Nathan's history, her own hidden charity warring with public cruelty. She told them about the 30 days of cleaning, learning, breaking, rebuilding. Luke Cross saved my life by losing his. He taught me that wealth isn't what you have, but what you give. That strength isn't never falling, but helping others rise. That love doesn't end when breathing stops. It transforms into something larger. She looked directly at Nathan. He made me promise to take care of his father. I intend to keep that promise. Not because I'm worthy of it, but because Luke believed I could become worthy. I liquidated everything yesterday. Every penny I have will go to ensuring no child is denied treatment again. The Grace Hamilton who signed death sentences with spreadsheets died with Luke. What stands before you is just Grace, who learned to love from a 12-year-old prophet. Nathan stood then, walked to her, took her hand. Together they faced the crowd. "My son," Nathan said, his voice carrying despite tears, "believed in redemption. He proved it's real. Grace Hamilton was our enemy. Grace, the woman, is our family. Luke's legacy isn't just the lives he touched, it's the lives he transformed, even those who failed him." They returned to their seats as Luke's favorite song played, "Somewhere Over the Rainbow," arranged for cello, the instrument he'd been learning before his hands grew too weak. There wasn't a dry eye in the cathedral. But more than sadness, there was something else: hope. A 12-year-old boy had redeemed the irredeemable. What else was possible? The burial was private, just Nathan, Grace, and Luke's grandparents who'd flown in from Arizona. The small cemetery overlooked the harbor where Luke had loved to watch boats, imagining journeys he'd never take. As they lowered the casket, snow began falling again, each flake unique and temporary. Like childhood, like life, like Grace itself. The week following the funeral, Grace discovered that grief was not a moment but a marathon. She'd moved from the motel to Nathan's house not romantically, but practically. He couldn't be alone, and she couldn't leave him. They existed in parallel mourning, cooking meals neither ate, washing dishes as if the mundane could anchor them to life. The hospital had given her leave, but she returned anyway, needing the work, the purpose. Luke's room remained sealed, no one could bear to clean it yet. But other children needed care. Other floors needed mopping. Other families needed the silent witness of someone who understood that hospitals were where hope and heartbreak lived in adjacent rooms. Nathan disappeared for days at a time, returning exhausted and empty. Grace didn't ask where he went until Walter told her, "He visits every child Luke knew, reads to them, brings them gifts. He's trying to keep his son alive by being him." Grace found Nathan one evening in Luke's room at home, surrounded by journals, drawings, photos. He was crying for the first time since the funeral, holding a Father's Day card Luke had made but never had the chance to give Dad. "You taught me that being brave doesn't mean not being scared. It means being scared and loving anyway. Happy Father's Day to the bravest man I know." She held him then, this broken billionaire. While he sobbed for the son who'd taught him more about living while dying than any philosophy or fortune ever could, they clung to each other, two souls hollowed out by loss, held together by a promise to a ghost. "He saved us both," Nathan whispered. "And now we save each other," Grace replied. "That's what he wanted. That's why he made us promise." Outside, Boston continued its indifferent spin traffic and commerce and life grinding forward. But in that house on Elm Street, two people were learning that sometimes love is born not from passion but from shared grief, not from desire but from duty to the dead. Luke Cross, 12 years old and buried a week, was still teaching them love doesn't end when breathing stops. It begins again, different but undeniable, in those who remain. 3 months had passed since Luke's funeral, and Nathan Cross had developed a ritual of searching through boxes he'd been unable to face for years. July heat made the attic of the Elm Street house stifling, but he continued his excavation of memory, finding pain and peace in equal measure. Grace was downstairs. Preparing dinner, neither would eat completely their new normal of going through motions while learning to live with absence. The box was labeled simply, "Rebecca Keep Forever." His late wife's handwriting, careful and precise. Inside, beneath their wedding photos and Luke's birth announcement, was something unexpected, a leather journal, aged and water-stained, with some Hamilton, RN, embossed on the cover. Nathan's hands trembled as he opened it. Maggie Hamilton's diary, somehow in Rebecca's possession. A note fell out, Rebecca's script. "Nathan, she gave this to me during my chemo. Said you'd need it someday, but not until you met her daughter. I don't understand." But Maggie was never wrong about important things. The entries began in 1985, but Nathan turned to 1987, finding what Rebecca had bookmarked. "Grace is 15 today. David hit her again last night. She took it so I wouldn't have to. My beautiful girl has learned to absorb violence like I once absorbed smoke in that fire. She thinks I'm weak for staying. She doesn't know David has the gun under his pillow, that he's promised to kill us both if we leave. So I stay. And she hardens. And we both pretend this is living. Nathan Cross is thriving at MIT. I saved one child from fire only to watch my own burn slowly. God forgive me." Nathan read entries spanning years, each revealing the truth Grace never knew. Her father's escalating violence, her mother's impossible choices, the nights Maggie went to work bruised while Grace slept. One entry from 1990. "Grace got into Harvard. She thinks it's because she's brilliant, and she is. But she doesn't know I've been cleaning the admissions director's house. Begging, trading favors I'm ashamed to name. My daughter will escape, even if I can't." The final entry was dated 1 week before Maggie's death. "The cancer is winning. Grace still blames me for everything, for being weak, for enabling David, for dying. She's right about the dying part. But I pray someday she learns the truth. Strength isn't about fighting back. Sometimes it's about absorbing the blow so someone you love doesn't have to. Nathan Cross has become successful beyond my dreams. If I'm right about who he is, he'll find Grace after I'm gone. He'll save her like I saved him. Full circle. That's how love works. It comes back around, just wearing different faces." Nathan carried the journal downstairs, where Grace was standing at the sink, washing the same plate for the third time, her grief ritual of repetitive motion. She turned when she heard him, saw the journal, and her face went white. "Where did you get that?" he told her. Then he handed it to her, watched her read, watched 40 years of misconception shatter with each page. When she reached the entries about the gun, about the threats, about her mother's calculated sacrifice, Grace's legs gave out. Nathan caught her, held her while she read the truth her mother hadn't been weak. She'd been a fortress, taking every blow so Grace could remain untouched. "She never told me," Grace whispered. "I hated her for being weak, and she let me hate her rather than tell me the truth." "Just like you never told anyone about your donations," Nathan said gently. "Both of you, hiding your strength because you thought silence was noble." They were still processing this when Nathan's phone chimed. A message from Luke's cloud storage scheduled to send 3 months after his death. Nathan had forgotten Luke's technology projects, teaching himself coding between treatments. The subject line, "For Dad and Ms. Grace open together." It was a video. Luke in his hospital bed 2 weeks before he died, looking directly at the camera with those wise 12-year-old eyes. "Hi, Dad." "Hi, Ms. Grace. If you're watching this, it means I was right, you're together now. Maybe not married or anything weird like that, but together, taking care of each other like you promised." Luke adjusted the camera, held up a drawing, 3 female figures with wings, connected by threads of light. "This is my mom, Ms. Maggie, and you, Ms. Grace, all angels, just different kinds. Mom was the angel who loved completely. Ms. Maggie was the angel who saved secretly. And Miss Grace, you're the angel who's learning to fly after forgetting you had wings." He smiled, that brilliant expression that had survived everything until it couldn't. "Ms. Grace, I need you to know something. I knew who you were before you came. I'd hacked into Dad's computer, sorry, Dad, and found everything. The denial letter you signed, the articles about you, the mean things people said. But I also found other things. Anonymous donations tracked through banking forensics Dad had hired. You saved so many kids, Miss Grace. You just couldn't save me the first time. But that's okay, because if you had, you'd never have learned what you needed to learn." Luke held up a stack of papers, printouts of news articles, medical records, donation receipts. "You weren't supposed to save me with money. You were supposed to save my dad with love. He's been broken since Mom died. And I've been so worried about leaving him alone. But then you showed up, and I knew why I got sick, why you denied treatment, why everything happened exactly as it did. Sometimes people need to break all the way before they can heal right. You and Dad were both broken in ways that needed each other to heal." He looked directly at the camera, 12 years old and dying and absolutely certain. "People aren't their worst moments, Ms. Grace. You taught me that by becoming better. Thank you for learning to see. Thank you for saving Dad. Thank you for letting me be the bridge between you." The video ended with Luke holding up one more drawing, Nathan and Grace. Stick figures, but clearly them, holding hands while a small figure with wings watched from above, smiling. Nathan and Grace sat in silence, processing the orchestration of a child who'd seen connections they'd been blind to. Finally, Grace spoke. "He knew everything and forgave it all." "He did more than forgive," Nathan said. "He transformed it into purpose." They made the decision that night, sitting at the kitchen table where Luke had done homework while dying. They would merge their resources, Nathan's billions, Grace's liquidated assets, the insurance settlement from Hamilton Healthcare's board. But more than money, they'd merge their understanding, Nathan's knowledge of quiet service and Grace's experience with systemic failure. "The Maggie, Rebecca, and Luke Foundation," Grace said, writing on a legal pad. "No child denied treatment, ever. Free care for those insurance abandons," Nathan added. "Full coverage, experimental treatments included." Within a week, lawyers were drafting papers. Within a month, the first child was admitted, a 9-year-old with the same leukemia Luke had fought. Grace recognized the families she'd denied their claim 2 years ago. Now she sat with them, explained their son would receive everything, cost nothing, no questions asked. The mother broke down. "Why? Why help us?" "Because a 12-year-old boy taught me that everyone deserves saving," Grace said, "especially those the system forgets." 1 year later, Grace Hamilton walked through the Ritz-Carlton's marble entrance at 7:30 a.m., the same revolving door that had once announced her arrival with imperial certainty. Everything about the space remained unchanged, crystal chandeliers catching morning light, the soft percussion of expensive heels on marble, the hushed reverence of old Boston money. But Grace herself was unrecognizable from the woman who'd rejected a scarred hand in this very spot. Her silver hair fell naturally now, no longer dyed to hide the years. Her clothes came from Target, comfortable, practical, honest. The designer wardrobe had been sold, the proceeds funding treatment for 17 children. She walked without the sharp staccato that had once announced her approach, moving instead with the quiet confidence of someone who'd learned the difference between power and strength. She noticed him immediately, a young man in the corner where Nathan had stood, counting coins from a worn wallet, calculating if he had enough for coffee. His clothes bore the particular exhaustion of homelessness, his hands shaking slightly not from cold but from something deeper. The same security guard who'd removed Nathan watched, ready to intervene. Grace approached without hesitation. "Excuse me, I'm about to have breakfast alone, which seems wasteful. Would you join me?" The man looked up, suspicious. His eyes held the haunted quality she'd learned to recognize trauma worn like armor. "I don't take charity." "Neither do I," Grace said gently. "That's why I know the difference between charity and connection. I'm offering connection." "Travis," he said finally. "Travis Coleman." They sat in the hotel restaurant where she'd once conducted million-dollar negotiations. Travis's story spilled out over eggs and coffee, Afghanistan, IED, friends who didn't come home, nightmares that wouldn't stop, a system that abandoned him after he'd given everything. "I used to matter," he said quietly. "Now I'm just someone people step around." "You still matter," Grace said. "Would you like a job?" "Doing what I can't? I'm not stable enough for most things." "Reading to sick children, playing cards with them, being present. The foundation needs people who understand that sometimes just showing up is heroic." Nathan appeared then, 2 coffees in hand, his wedding ring catching the light, simple silver. Nothing like the platinum monument Grace would have chosen before. They'd married quietly 6 months ago, not for romance but for partnership, 2 broken souls helping each other heal. He kissed her cheek, noted Travis, understood immediately. "Board meeting in an hour," he reminded her. "They want to discuss national expansion." "Let them wait," Grace said, still focused on Travis. "This matters more." The meeting, when she finally attended, was about scaling the foundation beyond imagination. 300 children treated in the first year, waiting lists eliminated. Walter, the janitor who'd taught her dignity, now served as honorary grandfather to young patients, teaching origami in the same halls he'd once mopped. Ruth ran the nursing program, training caregivers in what she called Maggie's method, seeing souls, not symptoms. Even Michael Barrett, serving 7 years for embezzlement, sent monthly donations from his prison wages, $23 that somehow meant more than his stolen millions ever had. That afternoon, Grace and Nathan stood at Luke's grave. The new headstone read, "Luke Nathan Cross, 2013 to 2025, he taught angels how to see." Grace placed an origami crane on the stone, perfect now after a year of practice, each fold a meditation on transformation. "Your boy saved me," she whispered to the stone. Nathan took her hand. "No, love, you saved yourself. He just showed you the way." They walked back toward the car, 2 people who'd learned that real wealth wasn't counted in dollars but in moments of grace. The foundation's motto, carved in marble at the entrance, caught the light. Every hand extended in kindness is a life saved. Behind them, wind lifted the paper crane into the Boston sky, carrying it high above the city where a 12-year-old boy had taught 2 broken adults that love doesn't end when breathing stops. It transforms, continues, and saves others. Grace Hamilton's journey from that cruel morning in the Ritz-Carlton lobby to redemption teaches us that gratitude often comes disguised as loss, and family isn't always bound by blood. She learned too late that her mother's perceived weakness was actually strength, that sacrifice can look like surrender, and that the hands we refuse to shake might be the very ones that once saved us. Luke Cross, in his 12 years, understood what Grace took 58 to learn. True wealth lies not in what we accumulate, but in what we give away. He saw past her cruelty to her hidden generosity, past her hardness to her buried pain. This dying child created a family from broken strangers, teaching them that gratitude isn't just saying thank you. It's recognizing that every person who crosses our path might be carrying invisible wings. The story reminds us that judgment based on appearance blinds us to angels walking among us. Sometimes they wear expensive suits and hide their charity. Sometimes they wear worn flannel and hide billions. Sometimes they're 12 years old and dying, yet still teaching the living how to love. Have you ever been dismissed or humiliated because of how you looked, only for that person to later discover they had misjudged you completely? Share your story below.